The chair is empty. Front row. Center. Seat number 1. A single red rose rests on the cushion. A folded piece of paper tucked beneath its stem. Oprah Winfrey stands at center stage. Her mouth opens, but no words come out. Her hand reaches toward the teleprompter operator, a gesture that means stop. The teleprompter freezes. The studio falls silent. 412 people hold their breath as Oprah takes one step forward, then another. Her eyes never leave that empty chair. She descends the 3 steps from the stage to the audience floor. Her heels make no sound now. She has slowed her pace to something almost ceremonial. She reaches the front row. She stops. She looks at the rows. She looks at the paper. And then Oprah Winfrey does something she has never done in 4 decades of live television. She sits down in the audience, in the empty chair, and she begins to cry. Not graceful television tears. Not the controlled emotion of a professional broadcaster. These are the tears of a woman who has just understood something that changes everything. The camera operators look at each other in confusion. The producer speaks frantically into her headset. But no one moves, because something is happening that cannot be interrupted. How do we get here? Rewind exactly 96 minutes. The morning had started with an email. Oprah's assistant had flagged it as unusual. The subject line contained only 3 words. Please remember her. The email was from a man named David Chen, 53 years old, a high school history teacher from Portland, Oregon. He had never written to the show before. He had never attended taping. He had never asked for anything. But today he was asking for something impossible. His wife, Margaret Chen, had been diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's disease 4 years ago. She was 51 years old. She had been a nurse for 27 years. She had delivered over 3,000 babies. She had held the hands of dying patients. She had comforted grieving families. And now she could not remember her own name. The disease had progressed faster than anyone expected. Most days she did not recognize David. She called him by her father's name sometimes. Other times, she thought he was a stranger who had broken into her house. But there was one thing she never forgot. Oprah. Every afternoon at 4 o'clock, no matter how confused she was, no matter how lost in the fog of her deteriorating mind, Margaret would sit in front of the television and watch old episodes of the Oprah Winfrey Show. And for 1 hour, she was herself again. She would laugh at the right moments. She would cry at the right moments. She would talk to the screen as if Oprah could hear her. David had recorded her once. In the video, Margaret was completely lucid. She was explaining to the camera why she loved Oprah so much. She taught me that my story matters, Margaret had said. When I was a young nurse, I thought I was invisible, just another person doing a job. But I watched her interview ordinary people and treat them like they were the most important people in the world. And I realized that everyone has a story worth telling. That is why I started really listening to my patients. That is why I held their hands. That is why I stayed late. Because of her. The video had made its way to Oprah's production team 6 weeks ago. They had arranged for David and Margaret to attend today's taping. They had reserved seat number 1 for Margaret. They had planned a surprise segment where Oprah would invite Margaret on stage, show the video, and honor her decades of service as a nurse. But something happened this morning that changed everything. At 6:47 a.m., David Chen called the studio. Margaret had suffered a severe episode during the night. She had become convinced that strangers were trying to take her away. She had barricaded herself in the bathroom for 3 hours. By the time David was able to coax her out, she was exhausted and terrified. She could not come to the studio. The doctors advised against any travel or stimulation. David's voice had cracked on the phone. But I still want to come, he said. I have something I need to give to Oprah. Something Margaret made before she forgot how. The production team had agreed. They had told him to take seat number 1. They had told him they would find another way to honor Margaret. But when David arrived at the studio at 8:30 a.m., he did not take seat number 1. He placed a red rose on the cushion. He tucked a folded piece of paper beneath the stem, and he took seat number 2 instead. He sat there for 2 hours before the taping began. He did not speak to anyone. He did not move. He just looked at that empty chair and waited. Subscribe and leave a comment because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. When Oprah walked onto the stage at 10:45 a.m., she had not been briefed about the change. The production team had scrambled to figure out how to handle the situation. They had decided to proceed with the scheduled show and address the Margaret Chen segment later, perhaps through a video message. But no one had told Oprah about the empty chair. So when she looked out at her audience, as she always did, her eyes swept across the front row, expecting to see faces. Instead, she saw a rose. She saw an empty seat, and something in her chest tightened. Oprah has spoken many times about what she calls her inner knowing, that sense that something is wrong before anyone tells you, that pull toward a person or a place that defies logical explanation. She felt it now, stronger than she had felt it in years. She tried to continue with her opening remarks. She read the teleprompter. She smiled. She welcomed her audience. But her eyes kept drifting back to that chair, that rose, that folded paper, and finally, she could not ignore it anymore. "Excuse me," she said to her audience. "Something is happening right now that I do not understand. But I need to understand it before we can continue." She walked off the stage. She approached the front row. She stood before the empty chair. And she asked the man in seat number 2 a question. Who was supposed to sit here? David Chen looked up at her with eyes that held 4 years of grief compressed into a single moment. "My wife," he said. "Her name is Margaret. She wanted to meet you more than anything in the world. She has watched you every day for 31 years. Even now, when she cannot remember my name, she remembers yours." Oprah felt her breath catch. "Where is she?" she asked. David shook his head slowly. "She is home. The disease took another piece of her last night. She could not make the trip." Oprah looked at the rose. She looked at the paper. "May I?" she asked. David nodded. Oprah reached down and picked up the folded paper. She opened it carefully. Inside was a drawing. It had been done in colored pencil. The lines were shaky. The proportions were off. The colors bled outside the boundaries. But the image was clear. It was Oprah, and next to Oprah was a woman in a nurse's uniform holding a baby. And beneath the drawing, in handwriting that trembled with effort, were 4 words. "Thank you for listening." Behind the scenes, Oprah made a decision that defied every producer's expectation. She turned to her production team. "Get Margaret on the phone," she said. "Right now. I do not care what the doctors say. I do not care what protocol says. This woman wanted to be here. She drew me a picture. She wrote me a message. The least I can do is talk to her." The producer scrambled. Calls were made. David's phone was borrowed. A video connection was established. And on a screen that had been hastily wheeled onto the stage, Margaret Chen appeared. She was sitting in a hospital bed that had been installed in her living room. Her hair was gray and thin. Her face was pale. Her eyes had that distant quality that comes with a mind slowly erasing itself. But when she saw the studio, when she saw the audience, when she saw the familiar set she had watched for 31 years, something happened. Her eyes focused. Her lips curved into a smile. And she spoke. "Is this really happening?" she asked. Oprah stepped in front of the camera so Margaret could see her. "Yes, Margaret," she said. "This is really happening. I am here. I am looking at you. And I need you to know that I received your drawing. I am holding it right now." She held up the picture. On the screen, Margaret's hand flew to her mouth. "I made that," she whispered. "I remember making that. It took me 3 days because my hands would not cooperate. But I wanted you to have it. I wanted you to know." "What did you want me to know?" Oprah asked gently. Margaret was quiet for a moment. The audience was silent. David was weeping in seat number 2. "I wanted you to know that because of you, I was brave enough to really see people," Margaret said. "When I started nursing, I was afraid. Afraid of death. Afraid of pain. Afraid of not knowing what to say. But I watched you interview people about the worst moments of their lives, and you never looked away. You never made them feel small. You just listened. So I learned to listen too. I held hands. I stayed late. I remembered names. I let people tell me their stories even when it was hard. And because of that, because of you, I think I made a difference." Oprah was crying now. The audience was crying. Even the camera operators were crying. "You did make a difference," Oprah said. "Do you hear me, Margaret? You delivered 3,000 babies. You comforted dying patients. You held the hands of grieving families. That was not because of me. That was because of you. All I did was show you what was already inside you. But this is the moment no one in the studio and no one watching at home ever saw coming. Margaret's expression changed. The fog seemed to lift completely. For a few precious seconds, she was entirely herself. She looked directly into the camera and spoke with a clarity that startled everyone who knew her condition. "I need you to take care of David," she said to Oprah. "When I'm gone, he's going to feel so alone. He has given up everything for me. His job, his friends, his own life. He sits with me every day, even when I do not know who he is. He reads to me even when I cannot understand the words. He loves me even when I cannot love him back. Promise me you will not let him disappear." Oprah turned to look at David. The man was shaking. His hands covered his face. His shoulders heaved with silent sobs. Oprah walked to seat number 2. She sat down beside him. She took his hands in hers, and she made a promise that she would keep for the rest of her life. "You're not going to disappear, David," she said. "Do you hear me? When Margaret is gone, you're not going to grieve alone. I'm going to personally make sure that you have support, that you have community, that you have people who understand what you have sacrificed. You have been a caregiver for 4 years. Now it is time for someone to take care of you." She turned to her audience. "How many of you know a caregiver?" she asked. "Raise your hand if you know someone who has given up their own life to care for someone they love." Nearly every hand in the studio went up. Oprah nodded. "This is the hidden crisis of our time," she said. "Millions of people, mostly women, but also men like David, who sacrifice everything to care for a spouse, a parent, a child. They do not ask for recognition. They do not ask for help. They just do what needs to be done day after day, year after year, until they have nothing left." She paused. "But today we're going to change that. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten." Over the next hour, the scheduled show was abandoned entirely. Oprah brought David onto the stage. She showed the video of Margaret explaining why she loved Oprah. She displayed Margaret's drawing on the massive screens behind her, and she announced something that no one had planned. "I am establishing the Margaret Chen Caregiver Foundation," Oprah said. "Starting today, we will provide financial support, respite care, and mental health services to family caregivers across this country. And the first recipient of that support will be David Chen." David looked at her in disbelief. Oprah continued, "You have spent 4 years putting Margaret first. Now it is time for someone to put you first. We're paying off your mortgage. We are setting up a fund for Margaret's medical care. And when the time comes, we're going to make sure you have the support you need to rebuild your life." David could not speak. He just held the drawing his wife had made. The drawing that had taken her 3 days because her hands would not cooperate. The drawing that said, "Thank you for listening." The drawing that would soon hang in the Smithsonian. Margaret watched all of this from her screen. Her lucidity came and went. Sometimes she understood what was happening. Sometimes she drifted away. But every time she drifted back, she saw Oprah. And she smiled. The episode ended with something unprecedented. Oprah asked the entire audience to stand. She asked them to turn toward the screen where Margaret was watching. And she led them in a message. 412 people, plus Oprah, plus every camera operator and producer and assistant in the building, spoke in unison. "Thank you, Margaret, for listening, for caring, for giving your life to others. You matter. You are seen. You are loved." On the screen, Margaret was crying, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of recognition. For one perfect moment, she knew exactly who she was, and she knew that her life had meant something. Margaret Chen passed away 7 months later. David was holding her hand. The drawing she had made for Oprah was framed on the wall beside her bed. In her final moments, according to David, she looked at that drawing and smiled. She said one word, "Oprah," and then she was gone. The funeral was attended by over 400 people. Nurses who had worked with Margaret, families whose babies she had delivered, patients she had comforted in their final hours. Oprah was there. She sat in the front row. In her hands, she held a red rose. She placed it on Margaret's casket, and she whispered something that only David could hear. "I kept my promise. The Margaret Chen Caregiver Foundation has now provided support to over 47,000 families. David Chen serves on its board of directors. He travels the country speaking about caregiver burnout and the importance of asking for help. He carries Margaret's drawing with him everywhere he goes. He shows it to audiences and tells them the story. The story of a woman who forgot her own name, but never forgot the lesson she learned from watching Oprah. The lesson that everyone has a story worth telling. The lesson that listening is the most powerful thing we can do. The lesson that love does not require memory. It only requires presence. Oprah speaks about that day often. She calls it the day she learned that an empty chair can hold more meaning than a full auditorium. The rose that David placed on seat number 1 is now preserved under glass in Oprah's private office. Next to it is Margaret's drawing. Next to that is a photograph of Margaret and David on their wedding day, 32 years before Alzheimer stole her from him. And beneath all of it is a small plaque with words that Oprah wrote herself. For Margaret, who taught me that presence matters more than performance. And for David, who taught me that love is not a memory. It is a choice we make every day. There is one final detail that most people do not know. When David first placed the rose on that empty chair, he almost did not include the drawing. He was embarrassed by it. The lines were shaky. The proportions were wrong. It did not look professional. He thought Oprah would think it was the work of a child. But something told him to include it anyway. Something told him that imperfection was exactly the point. That the trembling lines showed more love than any polished portrait ever could. That the bleeding colors proved how hard Margaret had fought to create something meaningful even as her mind was dissolving. That the 4 words, "Thank you for listening," contained an entire lifetime of gratitude. He was right. When Oprah saw that drawing, she did not see amateur art. She saw courage. She saw persistence. She saw a woman refusing to let the disease take everything. She saw love made visible. And she knew, in that moment, that some gifts cannot be measured by their technical quality. They can only be measured by the sacrifice they represent. Margaret sacrificed 3 days of struggle. 3 days of hands that would not cooperate. 3 days of frustration and tears and determination. 3 days of fighting a disease that was slowly erasing her. All for 4 words and a shaky drawing. That is love. That is presence. That is the lesson Oprah carries with her to this day. The empty chair has become a symbol. At every taping since that day, the production team reserves seat number 1. They never fill it. They place a red rose on the cushion. They leave a small card that reads, "This seat is reserved for everyone who wanted to be here but could not make it. You are seen. You are remembered. You matter." Audience members often ask about it. Some cry when they learn the story. Some take photographs. Some write letters to David and the foundation. But all of them understand. An empty chair is not an absence. It is a presence. A reminder of everyone who loves us from a distance. A tribute to everyone who carries us in their hearts, even when they cannot be with us in person. A symbol of connection that transcends physical space. Oprah says she thinks about Margaret every time she sees that chair. She thinks about the 3,000 babies Margaret delivered. She thinks about the dying patients whose hand she held. She thinks about David, sitting alone in seat number 2, waiting for someone to notice that his wife could not be there. And she thinks about the drawing, those trembling lines, those bleeding colors, those 4 words. Thank you for listening. She has said that if her entire career had to be summarized in a single image, it would be that drawing. Not the magazine covers, not the celebrity interviews, not the billions of dollars or the media empire or the cultural impact. Just a shaky drawing made by a woman who was losing her mind but refused to lose her gratitude. That is what matters. That is what lasts. That is the legacy. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss another story like this. Because there are more stories waiting to be told, more chairs waiting to be honored, more drawings waiting to be seen. And somewhere out there, someone is fighting to create something meaningful even as everything else is being taken from them. Find them. See them. Listen to them. That is what Margaret would want. That is what Oprah learned. That is what we can all do. One chair, one rose, one drawing. One act of listening. That is how we change the world. Not with grand gestures, not with perfect performances, but with presence, with patience, with love that does not require memory, only commitment. Thank you, Margaret, for listening, for caring, for the drawing that took 3 days, for the 4 words that said everything. You are not forgotten. You never will be.